Paul Dans, the director of the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, has stepped down. The conservative think tank's president, Kevin Roberts, confirmed Paul's departure from the organization in a statement, writing, quote, "We're extremely grateful for his and everyone's work on Project 2025 and their dedication to saving America. Our collective efforts to build a personnel apparatus for policymakers of all levels, federal, state, and local, will continue." Roberts was vague on providing details about Paul's next move, saying only that he will be moving up to the front.
Democrats have sought to link Trump directly to Project 2025, a 900-page blueprint intended for a second Trump administration. The ultra-conservative plan was compiled by a coalition of more conservative organizations and many Trump allies and former staffers. It called for a total overhaul of the federal government and axing as many as 50,000 federal workers that could be an obstacle for instituting a conservative agenda. The backlash against Project 2025 has been swift, with President Trump understanding it was becoming a political liability. Trump has vehemently denied having any connection to it. His campaign issued a stark warning for those who continue to lump the former president in with the controversial project. Now, it's worth noting that his running mate, J.D. Vance, wrote the foreword to the policy document. Writing in a statement released Tuesday, the Trump campaign said that reports of Project 2025's demise would be greatly welcomed and should serve as notice to anyone or any group trying to misrepresent their influence with President Trump and his campaign. It will not end well for you. Now, Rising reached out to the Heritage Foundation for comment on Trump denouncing the project, and they responded with an email statement, quote, "When we began Project 2025 in April of 2022, we set a timeline for the project to conclude its policy drafting after the two-party conventions this year, and we are sticking to that timeline."
Well, there you have it. Donald Trump really wanted to distance himself from Project 2025 to the extent that the leader of that thing is no longer running it for the Heritage Foundation. So I think that, it shows you that the media and the Democrats succeeded in demonizing this plan for conservative policy if Trump takes office again, and Donald Trump perceived it as a liability and has repeatedly said that he has nothing to do with it, doesn't really know or understand who's behind it, is not working to implement it, and now it's going bye-bye.
Yeah, I'm not saying Project 2025 and Trump 2024 are the same campaign. I will say that when you pick your cabinet members and your top staffers, you pick people because they have a political perspective that you appreciate, you find valuable, it aligns with you and your administration. 31 of the project's 38 creators, according to USA Today, were connected to the Trump administration. And some of them are people we've heard of, like Ben Carson, like Peter Navarro, who is the director of the Office of Trade and Manufacturing Policy. He spoke at the RNC. And after serving a 4-month sentence for defying a congressional subpoena, he was invited back. You have Kevin Cucciolini, who was the acting deputy secretary of the Department of Homeland Security during Trump. And all three of these guys are people who authored entire chapters of this book or policy plan or agenda. And I think that means something. I think it's not mental gymnastics to associate this with the Trump presidency.
No, but what's in Project 2025 is just conservative policy, which is what Donald Trump hopefully is going to try to implement. I want him to do at least some of the things in Project 2025 because Project 2025 is just conservative policy. And if you're voting for Trump, you're voting to enact a conservative agenda on immigration, on foreign policy, on the economy, on domestic spending priorities, on education spending priorities. What conservative think tank people want to do is reduce the size and scope of the federal government, reduce its influence on your life. They want to eliminate unnecessary, wasteful, needless spending. They want to shrink and reduce federal bureaucracies that have all of this policy-making power that we don't even fully comprehend, that stay in office regardless of which political faction is in charge, still implementing their vision, totally, wholly independent of political and democratic considerations. That is the good parts, to my mind, of Project 2025, an effort to grapple with this multi-headed hydra that has taken control of Washington in the decades since runaway federal government power became totally unconstrained by the legislature. We want to restore power to the legislature, to the people who are elected to office to make policy decisions on behalf of the American people, and then who are subject to democratic accountability, can be voted out of office when they don't do well. You can't vote, as we learned, you can't vote Dr. Fauci and people like that out of office. They just stay in office regardless of who's in power, making policy decisions. That is what my understanding is Project 2025 is trying to combat. That is what many conservatives want to get out of subsequent Donald Trump administration. They didn't get it out of the first Donald Trump administration, which totally failed to grapple with the deep state's vast powers. So we'll see if they're successful this time around. But look, it doesn't matter what you call it. If the label Project 2025 is unpopular, then I guess they should not be running on it, and they've chosen not to run on it. But they will be they'll be trying to enact parts of it, or else they're just being totally they're being evasive about what they're going to do when they get into government. It'd be a betrayal of conservatives to not do aspects of Project 2025, and the independents and the people out there who are not necessarily right-wing but are not satisfied with the kind of governance you've gotten for the last however many years.
It's interesting you see this as some kind of reduction in power for the federal government, because Project 2025 is being criticized for being a power grab for the executive branch, including the presidency, which is a key part of the federal government. They want to do things like ban the abortion pill access. They said directly that they want the Department of Health and Human Services to maintain a biblically based, social science reinforced definition of marriage and family. What they're pushing here is really a power grab for the president after the Supreme Court ruled that there's presidential immunity. I think we should all be afraid about the power the executive branch has now, according to the Supreme Court ruling, and the power that people very close to Donald Trump. CNN reported that it's over 100 former Trump staffers that are involved in this. They talk about transitioning banking away from having a central bank, and they talk about Congress and the president coordinating on these reforms. Now, the Federal Reserve is regulated by Congress, not the president. So if you're afraid of executive power, you should be afraid of Project 2025, because on several levels, they propose the President of the United States and the executive branch having more power than Congress when the Constitution dictates that these departments are regulated by Congress and Congress has the final say. So do we want the president and who becomes the president to determine what happens in federal agencies, or do we want the people we elect to Congress to oversee
No, we want the people we elect to Congress. I mean, these are federal agencies, so their leadership is appointed by the president, is in some places subject to congressional or Senate approval. That's how it was set up in the system. But right now, the people staffing the organizations are not accountable to anyone, not to Congress or the president, because they're not all political appointees. They just exist in the background, making policy forever. So we want to make it so that the president can appoint new people, and then those people's mandates, what they can do, is set by statutes, by laws that are approved by Congress. That's what the recent Supreme Court decision that reversed Chevron was about, was saying that agencies can't just make up rules anymore. They have to get clear authorization, not from the president, from Congress to make up new regulations. That has to be, they can't do that. Our system gives that power to Congress, and Congress has totally failed, totally set aside its law-making authority. They've willingly set it aside. They have ceded their lawmaking authority to the president and to unelected bureaucrats. They were happy to do so. They just want to go on TV and talk about all the things they're going to do if their side, Democrats and Republicans, do this. If you got to vote for us because we're going to do all this great stuff if we get in office next time, and they don't do anything. And that happens on the Republican side too. But I don't see it as a power grab. I mean, some of the things you're describing, I'm sure I don't agree with. I don't want to give what it would be, Health and Human Services to operate from some biblical premise, I don't even know what that means. I don't have any desire, neither does the Supreme Court, by the way, to limit access to the abortion pill. If people want to seek that, the Supreme Court turned down that challenge recently in it was like an 8-1 ruling or something. So that access to that is safe. That's fine. Again, these are just policy proposals from conservatives, some of which, if they have to do with economics, I probably tend to agree with, at least more because I'm in a more free trade, free market state of mind. I don't know if Heritage is. And then on the social conservative stuff, I don't want to make that government policy at all. And that's how it goes.
Right. The Supreme Court also in the past ruled in favor of protecting a national right to abortion, and they changed that. So I think we need to understand that these are people who are appointed by Donald Trump.
They just ruled on the abortion bill. They just did that.
Right. And I'm saying they could change their opinion under a Trump presidency if there was a national ban by Congress that was backed by Donald Trump. We could see things change as they have in the past. And I think people are afraid that this is someone who denied the results of the election in 2020 and was adamant about that. And we have a Supreme Court that ruled he has immunity for official acts. And 31 of these people who are key in writing this were people who worked for Donald Trump. At least 140 people, according to CNN, who worked for Trump contributed in some way to Project 2025. So his trend of wanting almost ultimate power as president of the United States, I think, is why people are afraid of this. And honestly, the weird stuff about women's rights are why people are afraid of something like this, and why associating it with Trump became a political liability very quickly. And also, I will say, it's worth noting Paul Dans, who oversaw Project 2025 at the Heritage Foundation, was interviewed by right-wing podcaster Tom Zawistowski. And Dans said directly, President Trump's very bought in with this. When they were talking about Project 2025, Dans also worked as chief of staff at the Office of U.S. Personnel Management during Trump's time as president. So the associations are clearly there. His attempt to distance himself from it, I don't think will work.
Yeah, you want to associate Donald Trump with Project 2025 because and maybe you're right, I don't know, that it's politically unpopular and that it's damaging.
It already is, and that's what makes me afraid
I'm not trying to disassociate him from it. I hope he embraces aspects of it and implements those policies if he wins the presidency, because I think they would be good for America. Not all of them, not biblical governance of the health department, but grappling with the vast federal bureaucracy that has made so many bad policies, especially during COVID and on other things, is something I want from my Republican president.
No, I would say that it's not the case that I'm trying to associate it with Trump because I don't like Trump. It is associated with Trump very clearly. And I don't like Trump because he's associated with people who want too much power in the executive branch. And I want to live in a free society with a democracy. And I don't like how he's packed the courts with people who make decisions that seem to be contrary to our laws and our Constitution. That's what scares me about Trump.
All right, more Rising right after this.